Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed coverage of today's newspaper. And as promised, we will integrate the relevant PIB articles wherever necessary to expand the coverage of these topics. And at the end, I'll be covering few additional PIB articles as well, which can be important for the prelims and mains exam. So the idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So before we start, I have a couple of very important announcements. If you're looking to enroll for our online classes, Unacademy is offering the subscription at just 17,999, and you also get a chance to unlock double validity. So this subscription will give you access to all the live and recorded lectures by our top faculties, along with the study material, the test series, and mentorship sessions. So to avail the offer, you have to link, you have to enter the link provided in the description and use the code IAS English. And what is this double validity? It essentially means if you avail a 6-month subscription, you get a 6-month subscription free. The same for 9, 12, and 18 months. And we are told that the offer is going to end tomorrow. So if you're looking to enroll, this is the right time. So please check out the details in the link provided below and don't forget to enter the code IAS English. And those of you who are preparing for mains 2026, who want to practice answer writing, cover the static portion and current affairs, we are presenting Conquer Mains 2026 program for you. This program will consist of live lectures by our top educators covering the static portion and the current affairs portion of all the main subjects, along with live answer writing sessions, mains notes, and there would be dedicated answer writing practice sessions by toppers of CSE 2025. So this program is available at 9,999 and the link for the same is provided in the description box below. With this, let's get started and look at the first set of articles. Today being the 5th of June, the world is marking the Environment Day. So on the occasion of World Environment Day, there are a number of special articles that the Hindu has published in today's newspaper. There are around 5 special articles that gives a lot of details and insights into environmental issues, climate change, etc. So let us club all these topics and take them up one by one and have a detailed discussion on these issues on the occasion of World Environment Day. But first, you need to understand why 5th of June is marked as World Environment Day. The World Environment Day was declared at the Stockholm Conference on Human Environment. This was the first ever global conference on environmental issues that was held in 1972, starting from the 5th of June. That's why the day is chosen to mark 5th of June every year as World Environment Day. This day is mainly celebrated under the United Nations, and the UN Environment Program leads the celebrations by working with governments and think tanks and institutions across the world to highlight the importance of environmental issues and biodiversity protection. So at the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment, a lot of key outcomes were noticed, and that is something which can be very important for the prelims and mains examination. See, by 1950s, the world had already started seeing the impact of human activities, anthropogenic activities on our environment. First, because of industrial revolution from 1800s onwards, then the world wars and the accelerated industrial production, particularly weapons production during the World War period, had caused extensive pollution, causing harm and damage to our environment and biodiversity. Then post 1950s, as countries were rebuilding themselves, reconstructing their economies, focusing on growth and development. Throughout 1950s and 1960s, the world again suffered from the impact of environmental destruction. Large-scale deforestation, large-scale air pollution, water pollution, which was resulting in health consequences. So in 1970s, for the first time, the UN started recognizing environmental issues as a top priority. In fact, if you look at the UN Charter, one of the primary objectives of the UN is to protect the environment and biodiversity. So, in line with this goal, the United Nations worked with Sweden to organize the first World Conference on Environment. Right? It was held in Stockholm, and this led to some key outcomes. Several global leaders also participated at the Stockholm Conference on Environment. And India's Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, delivered a historic speech at the Stockholm Conference. This is where Prime Minister Indira Gandhi linked poverty with environmental issues. The Prime Minister highlighted how environmental degradation is closely linked with increased levels of poverty. So, this became a pivotal moment as far as global environmental governance and international law with regard to environment is concerned. So, there were three major outcomes from the conference. The Stockholm Declaration was adopted with a set of 26 principles. For it focuses on the right of human beings to live in a clean and safe environment. It also recognizes the duty of human beings to protect environment and biodiversity. So there are 26 well-defined principles that became the foundational basis for environmental law and environmental governance across the world. It led to the adoption of Action Plan for Human Environment, consisting of 109 principles and a resolution that inspired many governments across the world to draft their own environmental laws and legislations. And more importantly, the Stockholm Conference established the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. The UNEP is today the lead agency of the UN that drives environmental initiatives. So, with the establishment of UNEP, the 26 principles of the Stockholm Declaration has been prioritized for global implementation. As I said, it recognizes the right of human beings to live in a clean and safe environment, also places a duty and responsibility to protect and safeguard the environment. It links human well being with environmental protection. It connects human dignity with development, limited usage of natural resources, brings up the principle of sustainability, promotes the goal of pollution control, and helps in protecting wildlife and biodiversity as well, and drives international cooperation amongst countries. So, through the UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme, which is headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, today the United Nations is driving all the key environmental frameworks, and India is one of the key participants that works very closely with the UNEP. In fact, the first article that we are going to discuss today is written by the chief of UNEP office in India. Now, when you look at how this conference impacted India, influenced India's environmental laws, this led to significant changes, constitutional and legal changes. The Stockholm Declaration of 1972 inspired our 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act during the emergency period, also known as the mini constitution. Key changes were made to directive principles of state policy and fundamental duties. Article 48A was introduced that places the obligation on the state to protect and improve environment and safeguard forests and wildlife. A corresponding fundamental duty was added under Article 51A Clause G, where every citizen has been vested with a fundamental duty to protect and improve the natural environment. Then, following the Bhopal gas tragedy of 1985, India learnt a key lesson that it's important to hold the polluter responsible and accountable and introduce the polluter pays principle to ensure liability in case of environmental disasters, to ensure that the polluter is held accountable in case of air pollution, water pollution. India drew inspiration from the Stockholm Declaration, the Stockholm Conference, and enacted the Environment Protection Act, the EPA, in 1986. To bring out this legislation, the Parliament relied on the powers of Article 253, where India fulfills its international obligations and uses the authority of Article 253 to enact laws that can override a state jurisdiction as well. So this has inspired our legislative framework as well, from the Water Act to Air Act that combat water and air pollution, to Forest Conservation Act, Environment Protection Act, as I mentioned. Even the EIA framework, the Environment Impact Assessment Framework, is inspired by one of the principles of the Stockholm Declaration. So essentially, Stockholm Declaration and the establishment of UNEP in 1972 had a big impact on India. It went on to shape environmental governance across the world and as well as in India. So with this basic understanding, let's dive into the first article, and I'll pick up a few important points from each of these articles and understand the various challenges that we are facing in the field of environment conservation and climate change. As I said, this article is written by the head of UNEP office in India. So it carries a lot of weight, a lot of insights. And this article is mainly focused on climate finance. Can India achieve its climate goals and raise the adequate finance that is required to achieve the transition? See, India has set a very ambitious goal of achieving net zero emissions by 2070. But according to estimates, to achieve net zero emissions by 2070, it requires considerable investments. The estimates show that we require investments to the tune of nearly $10 trillion, which is almost 2.5 times the size of our current GDP. Then, according to studies, $2.5 trillion worth of investments are required within this decade to help India meet its voluntary nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. As part of the Paris Agreement under the Climate Change Convention, India has made certain voluntary nationally determined contributions. Recently, it has been upgraded as well. So, to achieve those voluntary targets under climate action, we require $2.5 trillion in investments by 2030. So, it's very clear that environmental transition, the green transition to reduce emissions, to protect biodiversity from the impact of climate change, it will call for significant investments. Now, where will this capital come from? Where should it be invested? Now, when you look at emissions from India, there are four major sectors of our economy which are the biggest contributors of greenhouse gas emissions. This includes steel, cement, power, and road transport. These four sectors, they contribute more than 50% of greenhouse gas emissions in the country. Now, to promote green steel or green cement and transform the power sector and transport sector towards cleaner fuel and cleaner energy sources, India will not only require latest technology, but it would require considerable investments. Studies have shown that we would require up to $54 billion every year. That is roughly a minimum of 1.3% of our GDP. And between 2022 to 2030, in order to reduce our carbon emissions, we are expected to invest around $467 billion. So, can India really afford this finance, this amount of capital that's required? Can India really raise this realistically? Now, according to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and UNEP reports, by 2030, developing countries of the global south, they would require around $5 to $6 trillion. But if you look at the commitments made by developed nations of the global north, there is a huge mismatch. The reason why developed countries should take up the greater responsibility of climate finance is because they have historical responsibilities. Under the CBDR principle, the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities principle, which is the bedrock of climate change negotiations, developed nations are accountable for historical emissions and they have to own up to their historical responsibilities. So they have to assist the global south by not only sharing technology for cleaner energy, but also provide finance to help developing nations to adapt and implement clean sources of energy and ensure that they can deal with the impact of climate change. But if you look at the global commitments made, It is not even a small fraction of what the world requires. If developing countries require 5 to 6 trillion dollars by 2030, if you look at the commitments in parallel, developed world has promised barely $100 billion every year under the Paris Agreement of 2015. And even this contribution has not been delivered. It is just a commitment which has been made, but every year $100 billion has not been mobilized. Then, if you look at the Baku new collective quantified goal that was adopted recently, it has committed $300 billion by 2035. But India has rejected these commitments, stating that this is not sufficient, it's not enough to meet the global demand, the global requirement. So the answer is very simple. We can't rely on climate finance coming from developed countries. We can't expect the global powers to help us and raise the capital. India will have to do this on its own. So the question is, can India raise this significant capital? How can we do it? What options do we have? This is where the UNEP praises India's climate finance initiatives. Over the past few years, especially in the last 10-15 years, India has rolled out many new financial instruments, debt linked instruments, to raise climate finance to the tune of $55.9 billion by using a mixture of green bonds, social bonds, sustainability bonds, and other debt linked instruments. India has managed to raise significant capital, and this is quite impressive by global standards. Compared to other nations, India has managed to innovate in the world of banking and finance. And through these innovative instruments, such as green bonds or social and sustainability bonds, which are sovereign backed and debt linked instruments, right from the markets, India has been able to generate significant amount of climate finance. So this offers a roadmap for us so that India can independently take care of its climate financing requirements. Recently, the RBI brought out the climate finance and management of climate change risk directions for the banking industry. It was brought out last year. As per this framework that RBI has created, it has recommended that climate finance should be included under priority sector lending. See, right now, RBI has given a strict mandate for all the commercial banks and small finance banks in the country. Out of every 10,000 crore loan that they deliver, 4,000 crores has to come from PSL sector, the priority sector lending, where few priority sectors are identified. And to make credit available to these priority industries, the RBI has a clear mandate that for every 10,000 crore worth loans given out, at least 4,000 crores should have gone to PSL sector or priority sector lending. So the inclusion of climate finance under priority sector lending, this could bring the banking capital and drive commercial banks in the country to give out more credit on the basis of climate financing, to finance clean energy initiatives, to finance sustainability initiatives, disaster risk reduction initiatives. And along with that, we need to clearly distinguish between green funding, that is the loans that banks give out. They should make a clear distinction between green lending versus brown lending. Now, what do you mean by green lending and brown lending? Brown lending refers to the provision of bank credit or loans for polluting industries, for any commercial activity that can contribute to emissions. Whereas green lending refers to bank credit being provided to environment friendly initiatives, clean energy initiatives, waste management initiatives. So, within the banking sector, there is a need for complete transformation with regard to the loans which are being given out, where preference has to be given, priority and special treatment has to be given for green lending. So, green loans can be incentivized. Maybe the government can come out with a policy to subsidize the interest rate. Banks can offer certain incentives and low interest rate or flexible repayment periods so that they push the industry to borrow more of green loans as it becomes cheaper and brown loans become more expensive. This is what India will have to drive, and RBI and the government will have to drive this together. If RBI and the government provide the right policy support through incentives, through subsidies, etc., then green loans will become cheaper, driving the market to borrow more from the green funds and reduce the dependency on brown lending. So this will drive the economy itself towards clean industries compared to the emission driving industries. Then it is also important to inculcate climate risk assessment into the bank loans which are going to be given out in the future. See, today when banks give loans, they do carry out a credit risk assessment, right? They mainly look at the capability of the borrower, right? The profile of the borrower, whether they can afford this amount, can they repay this on time? They look at your credit worthiness, right? They look at your CIBIL score. So this is essentially credit risk assessment. The bank is assessing to what extent this customer can repay the loan and what is the risk present of this becoming a non-performing asset. Now, a similar risk assessment should be introduced to keep in mind climate-induced risk factors. As climate change drives more disasters, more extreme weather events, this can significantly impact the performance of economic activities. And this could in turn impact the delivery of loans and the repayment of loans by the borrower. So, inclusion of climate risk factors under the assessment is very crucial in the banking industry, and this also has to be driven by the RBI. Now, finally, there's one more step which is required. There is a need for greater legal clarity with regard to terms like green bonds or sustainability debt. This legal taxonomy has to be defined. If the terminologies are clearly defined through a law, then it would simplify the climate finance industry itself. So, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has promised this in the 24-25 budget that the government will be defining climate taxonomy, the climate finance linked taxonomy, these jargons or keywords. They'll be clearly defined with a legal backing so that it increases the adoption of these climate financing tools. The Ministry of Steels is coming out with a green steel taxonomy as to what constitutes a green steel. The Ministry of Finance will come out with climate finance taxonomy, and this legal clarity will drive the changes in the banking and finance industry. So essentially, there are four steps that India must take up, right? If we don't have to depend on global financial support, if we have to become self-reliant for climate funding, then these four steps are mandatory. It is essential. One, define the climate finance taxonomy. The government has to do this, right? There should be clear legal clarity on the terminologies and the definitions. Then RBI must push for green financing, make it a mandatory requirement for banks. As of now, RBI is just enabling green finance. It should mandate this as an obligation and give targets for banks and commercial banks to give out loans, primarily in the green lending sector. Then a state climate finance facility can be set up through NABARD, where local governments can draw climate finance, especially local bodies can depend on a state climate finance facility funded by NABARD. Then a sovereign green bond that can be scaled rapidly, where the government would back a green bond, a debt instrument that can be created, right? And this will significantly attract investments, right? Because it can offer good rate of returns, and government backing, the sovereign backing will add more credibility to it. If the government can scale it up, popularize it as an investment opportunity, there would be many takers for a sovereign green bond. And India has already experimented with this quite successfully. Now it has to be scaled up. So these measures will ensure that India can achieve some degree of climate self-reliance. So based on what we have discussed, please take up this mains practice question and practice your answer writing. Now let's move to the next article. There's an article related to the role of mangrove cover in protecting India's coastline. How mangroves can play a much bigger role than even sea walls, embankments, and other structural measures that are taken up in coastal areas to protect the coastline from the impact of hazards and disasters, be it tsunamis or cyclones or coastal flooding and coastal erosion. They are the biggest risk factors with regard to climate change and rising sea levels. and also because of increasing frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. So the writer is arguing that protecting natural buffers like mangroves can deliver much better impact, much better outcomes than investing in expensive projects like building seawalls and embankments. Because many governments at the state level, even across the world, you see this trend where governments invest in structural measures to protect the coastline, to protect the coastal communities. They end up building these expensive structures, embankments, and seawalls. Sometimes they may not even be effective solutions to contain the disaster risk. They sometimes just shift the disaster risk to some other place. An embankment or a seawall, it might protect a strategic facility or a particular coastal area, but it will simply transfer the risk to another nearby area where the disaster risk would be felt. So instead of focusing on these expensive and unviable projects, the writer is suggesting that protecting natural buffer like mangroves is the best solution to deal with rising sea levels and extreme weather events. So let's understand this topic in slight detail. It introduces a very important concept known as ecosystem based adaptation, or EBA. See, recently, when India was hit by many cyclones, be it Cyclone Dana or Cyclone Umphan, Cyclone Yas, the east coast of India took the brunt of it. But the mangrove restoration which has happened, the protection of the mangrove cover, and the improvement in mangrove coverage has played a big role in reducing the impact of these cyclones. The loss of life has gone down, loss of property, loss of infrastructure has reduced. Because mangroves, they act as a natural barrier, they cut the speed of the wind, the high speed winds that are generated during landfall event of a cyclone. They help in also arresting the coastal flood that develops during a cyclone or probably a tsunami as well. So this was very evident during Cyclone Dana when it made landfall along Odisha's coast. Bhitarkanika, which has one of the best mangrove covers in the country, played a crucial role in protecting the region and minimizing the impact on people, on infrastructure, and livelihoods. But if you look at what measures governments are taking today to reduce the disaster risk associated with cyclones or other coastal hazards, most governments are investing in building seawalls and embankments. Coastal states have already spent upwards of 2,600 crores. But if you look at National Coastal Mission, the budget has been reduced by the central government, meaning there isn't enough capital being given by the central government for these structural measures. State governments are trying to spend on them, thinking that this is a panacea to protect the coastal population against disasters. Please understand, India has a very extensive coastline at more than 11,000 kilometers. So it's not practically possible, it's not economically viable to build seawalls and embankments everywhere, right? So protecting the natural buffers is the right way by using a model known as ecosystem based adaptation. Now, before we learn what is ecosystem based adaptation, you have to understand India's mangrove cover. To what extent mangroves protect India's coastline and coastal communities? Almost all the coastal states in India have a decent to extensive mangrove cover, including island territories like Andaman and Nicobar. Now, when you look at the map of India, Andaman Nicobar Islands have an extensive mangrove cover, but the destruction of the mangroves had exposed these islands during the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. But following this, lessons were learned in disaster management, and India's mangrove cover was strengthened. And today, Andaman Nicobar is much better prepared to deal with the impact of such disasters. The same goes for east coast and west coast of India, be it Sundarbans in West Bengal, Odisha, especially the Bhitarkanika belt, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, to some extent in some parts of Kerala and Karnataka as well, Maharashtra, and several parts of Gujarat. They're all having a very decent to extensive mangrove coverage which protects their coastline. According to the Indian State of Forest report, which is brought out by the Forest Survey of India, India has around 4,992 square kilometers of mangrove cover, accounting for 0.15% of the country's geographical area. Sundarbans being the largest contiguous mangrove forest in the entire world. See, mangroves are a feature of the tropical belt, mainly found in tropical, subtropical countries, right? And mangroves are known for their unique adaptations. They thrive in a very risky environment, right? They come up in these ecotones, which are basically wetland ecosystems. They form a transitional boundary between a terrestrial ecosystem and an aquatic ecosystem. So, because of constant saturation of water and entry of the sea water as well, in these wetlands, the water would be extremely saline. It would also be a very low oxygen environment, right? Decomposition itself would slow down in these wetlands. Plus, the soil would be very weak as it is always saturated with water, which means it can't provide the required mechanical support for large trees to grow and thrive. And yet, mangroves are thriving in these wetlands because they have undergone multiple adaptations to overcome the high salinity, low oxygen environment, and the lack of mechanical support. Mangroves have diversified and adapted, and today they provide a robust defense, a natural defense against any hazards present in the coastal belt. So, India is blessed with a decent mangrove cover. Now, it's important to protect, preserve these natural buffers. So, under ecosystem based adaptation, you basically use biodiversity and ecosystem services to help the communities to adapt to the reality of climate change. See, climate change is a lived reality today. Now, we have to ensure that our population becomes adapted to it, meaning we should be in a better position to deal with the consequences of extreme weather events. So, when you make use of biodiversity and ecosystem services, like mangroves are offering an ecosystem service, the wetlands are offering an ecosystem service. They are serving us by protecting us against disasters. Plus, these wetlands that have mangroves, they provide livelihood opportunities for coastal population, for fishing villages, right? It allows the fishermen to carry out fishing in the wetlands. It is a source of medicinal plants, right, which has commercial applications as well. So it's a source of livelihood and sustenance for the local communities. So making use of those ecological services and biodiversity to help the communities adapt to the reality of climate change is what we mean by EBA, or ecosystem based adaptation. Now, when you look at coastal areas, there are different types of natural buffers that exist, not just mangroves. You also have seagrass. You might have extensive tree coverage, especially coconut trees. Then coral reefs and wetlands. They all collectively form the natural buffer or the natural defense. And India is a hotspot for coastal ecosystem based adaptation. According to studies, the number of people who can be protected because of EBA initiatives and mangrove protection is the highest in the world. Given India's high population and population density, compared to any other country, mangroves play a much, much bigger role. And if the right EBA initiatives are promoted and the mangroves are conserved and protected, it can help save the largest number of lives as compared to any other part of the world. More people per hectare than any other country can be protected through India's mangrove cover. Now, when you look at Sundarbans, recently a community led initiative that was taken up after the 2004 tsunami. It has helped significantly improve the mangrove coverage. It was driven by the local governments with support from state and center. And it was primarily a women led initiative, right? Women collective groups at the grassroots level. They took part in the restoration effort of nearly 4,600 hectares of mangroves. And the results were always ready to be seen. During cyclones such as Amphan and Yas, the Sundarbans Delta and the coastal belt of West Bengal was well protected, reducing the loss of life and loss of property and infrastructure. And this again highlights why it is crucial to recognize ecosystem based adaptation as a panacea to reduce disaster risk, to achieve disaster risk reduction. So, India has a dedicated initiative today for mangrove conservation and restoration. It's called MISHTI, the Mangrove Initiative for Shoreline Habitats and Tangible Incomes. Under MISHTI, the focus is on mainly restoring and protecting the mangrove cover across 9 coastal states in India. It will not only protect the natural buffer, it also focuses on generating tangible incomes and alternate incomes for coastal communities. So, under the MISHTI program, it's important to categorize and classify EBA initiatives separately. Ecosystem-based adaptation that relies on biodiversity and ecological services to protect the local population and help them adapt to climate change is a necessity. So the MISTI initiative should separately classify EBA initiatives and provide the right policy support for local communities. So based on what we have discussed, please take up this mains practice question and please practice your answer writing. Now moving on, there's another environment related article. As I said, the Hindu today carries a number of articles as special articles on World Environment Day. This article helps us understand the impact of El Nino, how it could drive an economic and developmental crisis in India. Right? The emerging El Nino, which is widely predicted, can have a devastating economic, social, and developmental impact on countries like India. The US National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has predicted the Enzo cycle, which marks the occurrence of the El Nino phenomena, right, uh, in central Pacific, particularly in the southern Pacific region between Australia and South America. The emergence of abnormally warm waters can drive changes in oceanic and wind currents, and eventually it can affect precipitation in many parts of the world, including the monsoons in India. It can drive floods in some places. It can affect rainfall, create droughts in some places. So El Nino is bad news for Indian monsoons. During every El Nino cycle and the Enzo cycle, we have seen a significant reduction in monsoon rainfall, and this can have a devastating impact on a country like India. Because, see, nearly 70% of our agriculture is based on monsoon driven irrigation. So, if monsoons fail, 70% of our agriculture could be impacted. And this will drive over dependence on groundwater. According to IMD as well, this year we are anticipating a below normal monsoon with the long period average placed at 92%. And this could go down even further. It can go down as low as 88 to 86%. We had seen this back in 2014-2015 period. So we might see a repeat of this and a sustained El Nino cycle, which can last for several months, extending up to next year's monsoon. It can result in severe heat waves, causing heat stress that can impact our urban economy, that can impact our factories, our industries, our construction and infrastructure projects. It can lead to water scarcity that will eventually impact agriculture, resulting in crop losses, could trigger drought conditions. It could affect the overall economy and industrial activity as well. It could create water shortage for drinking purposes. And eventually, the impact will trickle down into commodities, right? It will result in shortage of food, food inflation would get driven up, and this will have a disproportionate impact on the poor population of the country. See, that's the worst part about climate change. It always has a disproportionate impact on the vulnerable and marginalized, disadvantaged sections. So, when you look at the impact, it's not just economic impact. There is a clear developmental impact, a social impact. And this is what India should anticipate and India should prepare for. The heightened heat, which is already being felt during this summer season, which could continue all the way till next year's monsoon cycle, this will drive deadly heat waves. And this significantly will affect the productivity of workers, especially manual workers, daily wage workers, construction workers, street vendors who are forced to work out in the open. So productivity will go down significantly. This will affect their earning levels or income levels, and it will have a devastating impact on the well-being of the weaker sections in the country. Then the impact on agriculture could result in a big blow for rural economy. It could affect rural demand. It could result in crop losses. It could lead to spread of diseases and new pests infestation, which has a devastating impact on the entire supply chain of agriculture. And farmers will bear the entire brunt of this. So, with the agrarian economy hit and the lower sections of the society hit, if inflation settles in and starts driving up food prices, then that is a double blow for the economy. As food prices shoot up, it will affect nutrition, which in turn will affect health and creates a vicious and never ending cycle where millions of people could get pushed into poverty if there is no intervention by the state. And also look at the urban inequality it can create. As I said, severe heat, shortage of water will primarily affect the poor and the weaker sections. This will not impact the upper class or the middle class. They can always get away with the impact of heat stress and water shortage because they can afford cooling solutions. They can afford water even otherwise. So in urban India, you will directly feel the impact in few months, which will drive up inequalities, creating a big social mismatch. So this is the stark warning that you need to take away from the article, and it's essentially a caution for the government as well to plan for the difficult months and years that lie ahead. Next, we have an important editorial that deals with the deadly urban fires that India has witnessed. India is not new to urban fires. We have seen a spate of incidents over the years. Now, I'm sure you must have read about the Upahar cinema fire tragedy, or the Kamala Mills fire tragedy, or the fire that occurred at a nightclub in Goa recently, where many people have lost their lives. But what's shocking right now is that in 3 days, we have seen three consecutive disastrous fires, starting with the Delhi hotel fire, where 21 people were killed, most of them being foreigners. They were all medical tourists from Africa and Central Asia, right? And they couldn't escape in time. There were a lot of violations in this building which went unchecked, unnoticed. And eventually, innocent lives have been lost. This could even dent India's reputation with regard to medical tourism. Then, yesterday, we have witnessed a deadly fire in a hospital in Bihar, where 5 people have been killed, several have been injured. And hospital fires are quite common from UP to Bihar during summer months. Repeat and regular fires are witnessed in hospitals. Then we have seen such fires in apartment buildings, coaching centers, cinema halls, in restaurants. And today morning, disaster has struck again in Noida, an apartment complex, that too a luxury apartment complex, has witnessed a major fire incident, and it's an ongoing incident as we speak. So, in 3 days, 3 consecutive days, India has witnessed three back to back fire tragedies. This is a stark warning. See, this is not a natural disaster in any way. This is purely a governance failure. See, fire accidents will happen, right? A fire can get easily triggered, especially during summer months. You just need maybe one spark, or a short circuit, an electrical short circuit, or a gas leak, which can trigger a fire. So those incidents can happen, right? You can't really control that on a day-to-day basis. There is a possibility of these accidents occurring. But what causes this to become a disaster? What turns this into a disaster, into a tragedy, is systematic failure. The systemic failure in our governance is what turns a fire into a disaster. That is the lesson we have to draw from these incidents, right? Fires can occur. As I said, even one accidental spark is enough. A small gas leak is enough. A short circuit is enough to trigger a fire. But if right planning was there, if right preparedness was there, if vulnerabilities were addressed, if the laws and regulations were properly enforced, if standard protocols were implemented, then these fires can be contained with almost zero to minimal loss of life, minimal impact. But what turns even every single fire in the country into a disaster, into a tragedy, is the failure of governance and the systematic failure in enforcing and implementing the regulations. Now, you take the Delhi hotel fire, for example. It's again the same reasons that have contributed to the death of so many people. We saw this in the nightclub tragedy in Goa as well. Overcrowding is one of the biggest vulnerability, and the lack of building standards. The National Building Code of the Bureau of Indian Standards specifies specific standards for fire safety. right? There is a mandatory fire licensing requirement for all commercial and other establishments that come up. Local authorities, the fire services department, they are all responsible to conduct inspections, audits, only then approve these buildings to come up. They should have well planned exits. One big vulnerability is the blockade or non existence of escape and exit routes. In many hotels and hospitals, it has been seen, even if there is a fire exit, it is often locked. People can't even use it, right? Then you have unapproved modifications and unauthorized extensions to the building and interior spaces. Because see, there is a economic need to maximize the space that we have in the country. Because of our population, limited availability of land, there is an economic necessity to maximize the land because land is very valuable and precious. And this pushes people to cut corners. And the first compromise is on safety. Nobody invests enough on safety, even though it's mandatory. And authorities also tend to look the other way, as sometimes there exists a corrupt nexus between the local governments and officials and the construction and real estate industry. So, this creates the biggest vulnerability with regard to urban fires. Overcrowding, the blockade of escape routes or non existence of exit routes, unapproved construction, unauthorized illegal extensions and modifications, then poor compliance and weak enforcement. Also, the building material, right? The fire safety systems and protocols installed, they all matter. So, it's mandatory for commercial establishments to have fire alarms, automated fire water dispensers, and there should be enough space for fire services to reach the site, to access the building. But in most cases, these norms are violated, it's not implemented. You can't just blame the building owner for this, right? This is a systemic failure. But every time there is a knee jerk reaction, the governments will overreact. They have to show to the public and the media they are doing something. As you can see in the Delhi hotel fire incident, the building owner has already been charged with manslaughter. Correct? Yes, that accountability is necessary. These building owners have to pay the price, they have to be held legally accountable. But at the same time, the system also has failed the victims. Right? What about the officials, the government, the fire department, the local bodies, which were also responsible equally to prevent these violations from taking place? So, that is exactly what the editorial is trying to highlight. How internal modifications are done in buildings without following the basic norms of safety. Fire safety should be a top focus, a top priority in any building code. And India has enough laws and regulations. It's not that we need any new law or regulation, they already exist. What we just require is strict enforcement. Building that culture of safety, which is missing in the country. See, in a large populous country, human life becomes cheap. So every now and then these tragedies keep recurring. We cover that in the news and the country moves on after that. Everybody will forget the victims, right? As human life comes cheaper. So this is where the culture of safety should be prioritized. Every human life should be valued. The victims deserve their justice. And further tragedies have to be prevented. For that, you need to make the people aware. Ensure that people don't cut corners, right? Even if it increases the cost of construction, there has to be a mandatory compliance. So you need to create a system of regular inspections, audits, corruption free licensing and certification mechanisms at the local level, enforcement of the building codes and fire safety norms, creating incentives for building owners to promote fire safety. For example, what if the government can work out a interest subsidy on bank loan, on home loans, if the right fire safety norms are followed, right? If homeowners follow the right fire safety standards and the building and construction industry follows this, what if they get a small rebate on the interest they are paying on the home loans that are borrowed? So this can create that culture where people will not be stingy when it comes to safety, and it creates the culture of safety, and it can sustain that in especially in urban centers. Now, coming to the rest of the newspaper today, we have few small articles where there is a direct PIB integration, right? I'll be referring to those PIB articles as well. Look at this article on page 12, a very, very important development in the field of international relations. India and United Kingdom have launched a new initiative on critical minerals. It's called the Critical Mineral Global Supply Chain Observatory, the GSCO. Critical Minerals Global Supply Chain Observatory. This is mentioned in the press release of yesterday by Ministry of Mines on Press Information Bureau as well, making it a very, very important topic. UK's Foreign Secretary was in India, and this key announcement has been made. It's a new initiative, a joint initiative. It will bring together Indian institutions such as the TechSmin, the Technology Innovation in Exploration and Mining Foundation. It's a India-based foundation, a think tank of sorts that focuses on mining and exploration of critical minerals needed for critical emerging technologies. So TechSmin will work with IIT ISM Dhanbad along with the University of Cambridge, and they will establish a data driven monitoring system. A data driven monitoring system. And what will they monitor? They will monitor global supply chains of critical minerals. That's why it's called an observatory. It's a critical minerals global supply chain observatory. It will collect data, that is global trade data, regarding flow of uh, the export import data of critical minerals. It will look at the mining and exploration that's happening across the world, the investments which are being done from which country, from which company. It will create a complete database by monitoring and analyzing the global supply chain traffic. Clear? So this can drive our collaboration in the field of critical minerals and help both nations to achieve a degree of resilience and independence in their critical mineral supply chains. Now, this is very important given that India UK have recently signed a free trade agreement. We have also set up a very close defense partnership through the Defense Industrial Roadmap, where the defense industries of India, UK are coming together. And in the defense industry, particularly in aerospace, you require critical minerals quite extensively, right? So it will drive our bilateral trade and our defense cooperation as well, and give us better insights on the global movement of critical minerals. So it's an observatory that will monitor and analyze the global supply chains of critical minerals. Next, a very important visit that is ongoing. Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, is on a high profile visit to India. Now, this comes at a crucial time because earlier this year, the then president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, was kidnapped, abducted by American special forces. This was one of the gravest violations of international law by the Trump administration. But India did not openly condemn this. And following the Iran war and the blockade of Hormuz Strait, US has been pushing countries, including India, to buy oil from other sources, especially from countries like Venezuela. Because Venezuela has the world's largest known oil reserves, especially in the Orinoco Delta and the basin. So India was previously buying energy from Venezuela until 2018. Venezuela was a key source of crude oil supplies. Indian companies were investing here as well, especially ONGC Videsh Limited had picked up a stake in some of the oil fields, and Venezuelan oil was reaching Indian refineries. Some of India's refineries, they have the capacity to refine and process the unique variant of Venezuelan crude. It's a heavy crude, very viscous. It requires a special process to refine and process this crude. It's very high in its viscosity, right? And Indian refineries had the capacity. So until 2018, we were procuring some quantity of Venezuelan crude, and Indian companies were making investments as well. But following the US sanctions under Trump 1.0 during the Trump's first presidency, we cut back on our Venezuelan oil imports in the 2019-2020 period. We completely stopped oil imports from Venezuela. So since then, given the state of relations between US and Venezuela and the continued impact of American sanctions, India did not resume oil trade from Venezuela. But now that the acting president and the new Venezuelan administration, they have pledged support for Trump's policies aligning with US strategic goals in the Americas region. US is pushing Venezuela to sell its oil, and many American companies are making significant investments. Right? Trump has been very open that the military intervention to abduct Nicolas Maduro was also driven by oil interests. Right? So this is a new form of colonialism. And India, which has been encouraged by the US to buy Venezuelan oil, has been looking to do the same. Given the Hormuz blockade and the vulnerabilities of oil from Persian Gulf and West Asia, India is looking to diversify the oil sources. So that's why this visit of Delcy Rodriguez is very important. And don't forget, India Venezuela share a very close partnership from many decades. There was a time when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi visited the country. We do have a decent people to people relations. And now we are focusing on collaboration in other domains as well. So, in this ongoing visit, all these key areas of bilateral cooperation will be discussed, from health to climate change to economic development, because Venezuela's economy has crashed under the impact of US sanctions. Venezuela would like to learn from India, maybe attract investments from India, and India would like to secure its energy security through Venezuela. And one interesting connection is that, be it Nicolas Maduro or Delcy Rodriguez and many of the top leaders of the Venezuelan administration, they're all loyal followers of Sri Sai Baba at Putparthi. So that's another spiritual connection that binds the Venezuelan regime with Indian spirituality, right? So there is a cultural link as well. So this is an ongoing visit. We'll continue to track the topic, and any big developments, we'll discuss this again. Next, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has announced a new financial power policy that provides more authority for military commanders to carry out spending on their own, gives them more fiscal autonomy that will help bring greater efficiency in our military procurement. So this was a big announcement that was made by Defense Ministry yesterday, and there is a important PIB article as well in this regard. So we are integrating PIB here as well. So Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has announced a major increase in financial autonomy given to military commanders at the field level for all three armed forces, for Army, Navy, and Air Force. This is known as Delegation of Financial Powers for Defense Services. It's a new policy within the Defense Ministry to drive up defense procurement up to 1.25 lakh crores, and wherever emergency procurement is required, right, to improve logistics, to improve military operational efficiency at the field commanders level, the local commanders are being given enhanced powers. Their financial authority has been increased by 100% to 200%. Let's say previously a field commander had a financial autonomy of, let's say, 1 crore rupees. Now it has been almost doubled, anywhere between 2 crores to 3 crore rupees. In some cases, it's a doubling of the financial powers for certain operational commanders. And in some cases, it has been at least 100% increase in financial delegation. So without waiting for approvals from the ministry or from the other concerned stakeholders, local operational field commanders can take those financial calls to step up defense procurement, and this is likely to improve operational efficiency. It will improve military logistics as well, right? And the goal here is to drive Atmanirbharata. The commanders would be directed to mainly spend the money, the autonomy which is given to them, to spend that money on local procurement, to reduce dependency on foreign OEMs, foreign original equipment manufacturers, and procure locally, domestically, in line with Make in India initiative and Atmanirbhar Bharat initiative. So this provides delegated financial autonomy to the tune of 1.25 lakh crores and brings better speed into defense procurement, better speed and efficiency into defense procurement. Next, an important update from the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India has brought out a set of draft guidelines for regulating the use of AI in judiciary. This can be a very important topic. See, recently there was one shocking incident where a trial court, the judge had used a AI tool to deliver a judgment. This was heavily criticized with the Supreme Court, right? And it basically grabbed national headlines as well. That how can you allow untested AI tools to drive human judgment and judicial authority? That's what a trial court judge had done, relying on a AI tool to deliver a court judgment. So it's high time that the judiciary lays down the regulations and the framework, because usage of AI is inevitable in every domain, including in the judicial domain. So in this draft guideline that has been brought out by a committee headed by Supreme Court Judge Justice P.S. Narasimha and comprising of other senior judges of the Supreme Court. This draft is now in front of the public domain. It's been placed in the public domain for feedback until 20th June, and after that, it will be notified by the Supreme Court. So, under the new draft Supreme Court guidelines, AI systems are prohibited to be used in judicial outcomes. The final judicial judgment can't be determined through a AI tool, even an agentic AI. It is explicitly prohibited as per the draft rules. However, AI can be used. For what? AI can be used for case management. It can be used for transcription, translating judicial verdicts. It can be used for better efficiency in court operations on the back end, for listing of cases, for managing the interaction with the public, with the litigants, for translating the judgments into different languages. This is where AI can be used very effectively to bring judicial efficiency. But in this draft guideline, the Supreme Court is making one thing very, very clear, that AI systems must only act as assistants. They should function just as an assistant to supplement and assist a judge and the judicial system and the processes. It should never override the human involvement. There should always be a human in the loop. This is one of the key philosophy followed in these draft guidelines. It has made it very, very clear that human judgment and judicial authority cannot be made subservient to a AI tool. Whatever AI assistants are used, they should be subservient, subordinate to judicial authority and human judgment. So this establishes the primacy of human judgment. The judgment of the judges and the authority of the judiciary is held supreme. The primacy is established, and AI tools can only act in a assistant capacity. So to roll out AI in judiciary, a dedicated apex body is proposed. A new apex body will come up within the Supreme Court, which will be constituted by the CJI, the Chief Justice of India. So this committee or this apex body is proposed to be headed by a senior judge of the Supreme Court as the chairperson, who will be appointed by the Chief Justice of India. It will also comprise of 2 senior judges from Supreme Court, 2 High Court Chief Justices and 2 judges from High Court, and as well as a member from an institution of national importance of repute, and an officer from Ministry of Electronics and IT, not below the rank of Joint Secretary, and a cybersecurity and finance expert, who will all be nominated by the CJI. That is the composition of this apex body. So this body within the Supreme Court will drive the induction of AI assistants into India's judiciary. Now coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look at the small articles. On page 4, there's a reference to the Northeast Council. Union Home Minister Amit Shah attended the 73rd plenary session of Northeastern Council in Shillong in Meghalaya, where the Northeastern Council is headquartered. So what is this Northeastern Council? It's a statutory body to achieve interstate and center-state coordination for development of Northeast region. It was established in 1972, headquartered in Shillong in Meghalaya, and it has statutory backing under the Northeast Council Act of 1971. So it brings together 8 states from the region, including the 7 sister states and Sikkim. So Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, Mizoram, Nagaland, and Tripura, along with Sikkim, are part of this council. And Sikkim was added much later, following its integration into the Indian Union, right? And it was brought into the Northeastern Council through an amendment to the Northeast Council Act in 2002. So it functions under the nodal ministry, the Ministry of Development of Northeastern Region. And the composition of this council is very important. The ex officio chairman of this council will be the Union Home Minister. Since MHA is the nodal ministry for center-state coordination, right? The Union Home Minister will be the ex officio chairman. By virtue of being the Home Minister, automatically he or she will become the chairman of the Northeast Council. It also has an ex officio vice chairman, who would be the Minister of State, in the Ministry of Development of Northeastern Region, then all the governors and chief ministers of these states will also be a part of it. All the chief ministers and governors of these 8 states will be a part of it. And other experts and officials can also be invited. And it functions as the apex planning body for the Northeast region to focus on the development of Northeast region. Next, the Enforcement Directorate has carried out searches in Mizoram in illegal Supari case. Now, the case itself is irrelevant, but what we need to understand is the prevalence of organized crime along the India-Myanmar border. India shares a sensitive 1,643-kilometer border with Myanmar, right? So there is a lot of trafficking that happens into India. There is a trafficking of drugs, narcotics, arms and weapons, wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, and other illegal contraband. So in this particular case, the dry areca nuts, which are illegal, banned, it was being smuggled by criminal cartels from Myanmar into India. The case itself is not too relevant, but the locations mentioned here can be very important for a geography-based, map-based question. It mentions the Tiau River, which flows from Mizoram into Myanmar. From the Champai region of Mizoram, it flows into the Chin state of Myanmar, right? It basically marks the boundary here between India and Myanmar. So please make a note of that. Then Champai and Zokavtar, these are two major border towns. It is crucial for cross-border trade. It is also crucial for the cross-border relations between the people of the two countries, because the Mizo people are closely linked with the Chin community of Myanmar. They are ethnically related. So border districts like Champai and border towns like Zogtar, they are very crucial for cross-border relations between the two sides. So please remember these locations and the Tiau River. Next, Gujarat police have carried out a major drive to identify illegal Bangladeshi migrants and detain them to further deport them back into Bangladesh under Operation Delta Hunt. So that's just one update. Sometimes UPSC might focus on state-led security developments as well because it has national implications. So Operation Delta Hunt was the code name of this operation by Gujarat police, where they have monitored illegal Bangladeshi migrants in the state, identified them, and they're detaining them. Next, on page 16, there's a reference to the Five Eyes Alliance. According to a latest report, Chinese intelligence, the Ministry of State Security, the MSS, is actively recruiting spies from foreign governments, target Western governments, by using platforms such as LinkedIn. Especially on LinkedIn, Chinese intelligence operatives are scouting for potential targets to be recruited. They're mainly looking for those who work for governments, research institutions, academia, and those who are already part of key institutions from US to Europe. And this could apply to India as well. So they're reaching out with these job offers or conference offers, which are essentially a trick to deceive the victims and eventually recruit them so that they can lure them either with money or later induce them and threaten them probably. And very active recruitment is being done by Chinese espionage services, intelligence agencies through platforms like LinkedIn. So this is a warning raised by the Five Eyes Alliance. So what is the Five Eyes Alliance that can be relevant for the exams? This is an intelligence gathering and sharing initiative amongst 5 Western democracies. Its origin goes back to Second World War in 1941, when US and UK worked together to focus on signals intelligence, to collect signals intelligence by intercepting communication and share the intelligence with each other. This led to the US-UK Agreement of 1946, under which they formalized this intelligence sharing initiative. Then slowly other countries were added. So today the Five Eyes include not just US, UK, it also includes Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So their respective technical and signal intelligence agencies are part of this alliance. For example, From US, you have the National Security Agency, the NSA. From Britain, you have the GCHQ. And similarly, the counterparts from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. This is one of the world's largest intelligence gathering alliance. Now, they have significant capabilities. They can basically intercept every piece of digital and electronic communication on the planet. They can intercept satellite communication. They can intercept mobile internet traffic, all the submarine sea cables, undersea cables. They have tremendous capabilities with surveillance centers located across the world, and they share intelligence with each other. There is an informal expansion of this initiative as well. You have something called 9 Eyes, 14 Eyes, that brings many like minded countries together, like Japan, South Korea, and others. But Five Eyes is a provenance intelligence alliance between these five countries, focusing on signals intelligence gathering and sharing of that information. Now, coming to the PIB section, right? There is one important article yesterday. We've already covered a few by integrating it with Hindu articles. Now, there is this important press release from Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. India has launched its first ever flex fuel passenger vehicle. So in prelims, you can expect a question here on what is flex fuel passenger vehicle? What is India's policy with regard to flex fuel passenger vehicles? How do you define it? Flex fuel passenger vehicle refers to any vehicle which can operate with flexible fuel variants, especially a vehicle which can use different blends of ethanol from E20 to E85. Ethanol blended fuel in the range of 20% to 85%. If this flexible fuel variant can be used, then those vehicles will become more versatile, right? It will significantly reduce our dependency on oil imports. It will significantly help tackle the impact of air pollution, because especially E85, that's ethanol blended up to 85%, is, according to Niti Aayog, free from particulate matter emissions. It has near zero PM emissions that can bring very significant environmental improvement. And it will also generate income for biofuel industry, thus generating income for farmers, as the ethanol source mainly comes from agricultural feedstock, right? So it's like hitting three birds with one stone. So the government of India is actively promoting the production of flex fuel vehicles, especially Indian automobile manufacturers such as Maruti Suzuki, Hero Motocorp. They've already entered into a deal with the government, and they will start rolling out flex fuel vehicles. This is a norm that you see in other countries as well, where one car, one two-wheeler, right? They can take in multiple types of fuel. They can take E20 as well, or E60, E70, E85. And this flexibility will help drive adoption of blending of ethanol into the fuel program. So ethanol based mobility will help India transition, and it provides for tackling pollution with near zero emissions. So these flex fuel vehicles that can handle ethanol petrol blend from E20 to E85 going up to E100 range, they are considered as flex fuel vehicles. So there is a BIS standard for these vehicles as well, and the government is establishing such petrol stations, fuel stations that can provide different categories of ethanol blended fuel. Eventually, we'll be looking at 100% ethanol blending as well. So in the Delhi NCR corridor, in the Mumbai, Pune, Nagpur corridor, dedicated ethanol fuel stations will also come up to ensure the required fuel availability. And the government is incentivizing the industry to produce these flex fuel vehicles. The government is providing pricing support, road tax concessions, and testing facilities for ethanol blended fuel, so that the industry is also incentivized to produce these flex fuel vehicles. So please note the advantages of introducing flex fuel vehicles and what's the definition of a flex fuel vehicle. Flex fuel vehicle can handle different blends of ethanol petrol combination from E20 going up to E85, eventually up to E100. So the same vehicle can handle different blends of ethanol. So on this note, I bring the analysis to an end. I hope it's been a productive session. If you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.